Filmed live in Canada, it's Jim's Record Party. Indeed it is. Hello everyone. Welcome to Jim's Record Party. I'm your host, James. Is it time for another versus? Is it overdue? Well, perhaps it is. And today we have one, a classic one. Ms. Rickie Lee Jones versus Ms. Joni Mitchell. Two of their most famous albums. Let's talk about them. This is a versus, don't forget, ladies and gentlemen. Miss Rickie Lee Jones, born in 1954, presently has 15 albums in her catalog. This was her first. The eponymous Rickie Lee Jones. This has the huge hit, Chucky's in Love, of course. This is from 1979 on Warner Brothers. Produced by Russ Titelman. He now has 3 Grammys, and Lenny Waronker, and he was, I believe, just the past president of the label, Warner Brothers itself, when he co-produced this album. Last Chance Texaco Company on Saturday afternoons in 1963. Then you got the jazzy tunes, Young Blood, Danny's All-Star Joint, Weasel and the White Boys, and Coolsville. I think that probably could have been left off the album. That's where this album falls and fails for me slightly. Let's talk about that more in a second. Chuck Findlay on horn. Many other players on both these albums. We'll just make some highlights. Steve Gadd, Victor Feldman, Mac Rebennack, yeah, Dr. John, he's on this album. Randy Newman is on this album. Tom Scott is on this album. The great sax player Ernie Watts is on this album. And Michael McDonald, yeah, he's on this album. Yeah, he's on Steely Dan albums. Yeah, he's on Doobie Brothers albums. Yeah, he's on his own albums. Yeah, he is everywhere. This is a fantastic album. I think it is broken up by the jazzier tunes which are self-conscious. Her self-consciousness with being this street cred performer. Another artist who could just walk in the room and sit down and everybody would just be completely happy to be in her presence, and she wouldn't have to say a word. Less is more with Rickie Lee Jones. Enjoyed seeing her in concert. Fantastic. Performer is not the right word. It is slightly the right word. She does have that performance quality in person and in beautiful vocal form. Let's move over to the Joni Mitchell album from 1974 on Asylum at this point. This is Joni's 6th album. She now has 19 in her catalog. Joni, born in 1943, a Canadian. The great radio tunes, Help Me, Free Man in Paris, and of course the eponymous Court and Spark, People's Party, Down to You, Raised on Robbery, the goosebumps, I can hardly speak, the titles of these tunes, with Robbie Robertson on, and then closes with the Lambert, Hendricks, and Ross tune, of course, Twisted, which brought LHR into a lot of people's consciousness in 1974. Could it have been left off this album and it would still be a 100% album? Yeah, it could have been. And does it point forward into the future of her ever more use of and expression through the form of American jazz and its influences, as Rickie Lee did and does? Yes. Both of these ladies, enraptured by, twisted by American jazz and the idiom. Rickie Lee, as I have said, I believe is more self-consciously in her use of it. Perhaps because this is her first album and this is Joni's 6th album. It's just that extra time that has given Ms. Mitchell a comfortableness and familiarity with the idiom in the studio. These are both essentially studio albums. I believe there are 2 shorter live in the studio tracks on the Rickie Lee Jones. Did we say the Jazz Crusaders, Milt Holland, Tom Scott, Chuck Findley again is on this album, Tom Scott again is on this album, Larry Carlton is all over this album, great, most tasteful jazz guitarist. Robbie Robertson, as we've said, is on this album. Max Bennett, the great bass player, is on this album. Wilton Felder, Joe Samplin, both from the Jazz Crusaders, of course. Produced by Miss Joni Mitchell herself. Again, no mean feat. Dave Crosby and Graham Nash on this album. Singing backup, among others. These albums are very, very closely matched. This is a hard separation in which, again, it's going to come down to half a point, ladies and gentlemen. I don't see how we can separate these albums by any greater amount. The maturity, the gracefulness, the use of the musicians on Court and Spark, the worldview, the vocal itself, the lyrics, all give Joni Mitchell the win. This is no disgrace to Miss Rickie Lee Jones. This is a fantastic first album. And interesting that Court and Spark lays well outside my 3-album rule, which we'll talk about in the future, ladies and gentlemen. Rickie Lee would go on to make album after album, great album after great album. Pirates, Magazine, the EP with Walk Away Renee and My Funny Valentine. I love that EP. But on this versus, Miss Rickie Lee Jones versus Miss Joni Mitchell, the win is to Miss Joni Mitchell, ladies and gentlemen, here on Jim's Record Party. Thank you very much for joining us today. This has been a blast. This has been a versus, another very good one to the greatest singer-songwriters of the 20th century, of the early 21st century. Miss Rickie Lee Jones and Miss Joni Mitchell here on Jim's Record Party. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us. Please comment, like, and subscribe. Please join us again next week at this same time on this same station. I'll be your host. My name is James. When we join again on Jim's Record Party.